Andor Season 2, my thoughts and review. Honestly, it's taken me this long to get around to doing the review because I think I still had to emotionally process this season. Overall, straight off the bat, this season left me pretty speechless, especially back half of the season from pretty much episodes 7, 8, 9 to 10, 11, 12 was nothing short of astounding for me personally. Now, I'm going to start off with talking about sort of some of the characters that we got through and all their character arcs really intertwined with each other. Cassian, obviously, we finish with him in this season being such a robust and rounded character to, if you compare him to season 1, you know, he was really directionless, clueless. He didn't really want to be involved in anything and part of anything. To see where he is now is absolutely incredible. But the best thing about it is that I think they really eloquently told his sort of journey of sacrifice and tough experiences to really chisel who he becomes in Rogue One, this, you know, sacrificial leader of the rebellion. In everything we see of Cassian, you really feel the weight of everything beforehand. And it starts off pretty strong with, you know, the end of the first arc in the season, episode 3, when Brasso dies. That was so emotional how he discovered that and Cassian was the one to like find him, and how just at the end of every arc essentially is this flag post for Cassian to realize something, accept something, and feel something. And we are there as the audience feeling that with him. That loss of Brasso, you know, the kind of intensity of seeing the Gorman massacre and saving Mon and all these things are happening to him in this period of time. And even though it's across years, every time we see him the next, arc or even the next episode, you feel that weight still. So he's a very weighty, in-depth character, very gritty. I think this sort of point of his character of that weight he carries was perfectly exemplified with this conversation and dialogue when him and Bix on Yavin go talk to the Force Healer. That was such an incredible scene. I, at first, sort of watching, I think I didn't really absorb enough of that conversation. But on the rewatch, that was so good, and the way it perfectly ties in at the end, and even in the finale, we have that montage, and we see him, nod at her and acknowledge her again. But this Force Healer character coming in saying you were destined for greatness, essentially. You were a messenger, is so poetic. And I think this sort of intertwines his relationship with Bix and how that is so important to him. And I mean, it was because it was so beautiful seeing him and Bix, in this domestic loving relationship. It was so beautiful and so deserved. He's lost so much. So I think we all felt so much support for that relationship. This very complex, her leaving and saying you need to focus on this, I think was not expected. Like I couldn't have thought to, expect that if I tried. But I love that. I think it's really, really emotional. Cried like a baby when Bix left, but with all that, it's incredibly well written. What an incredible kind of experience for his character to go through. Again, making that weight and depth for when we see him at the end of this show and subsequently in the start of Rogue One, we feel that. We feel that weight within him. His reason to keep going, his reason to keep fighting, the strong, courageous leader he becomes. Also seeing Cassian in his peak at this point is when he saves Mon from the Senate. I think this is really a show of his espionage abilities. He's not just a kind of loose gunner or pilot. Now he really is this not just kind of emotional leader, but really physical leader that knows how to get things done. That whole sequence is probably my whole entire favorite scene of this whole season. I absolutely adore it. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about Mon Mothma. If it's good writing, if the character we end with is different to the character we started with, and that's so obvious. Just go back to season 1, episode 1 of Andor. He's a completely different person to what he becomes and ends up. And it's those notes of hope. It's those notes of building and not ending your fight, not never giving up. And he's like the pain he goes through, but the fact that he's still here with the rebellion is incredible, and I love it. So just previously mentioned Mon Mothma. I want to jump into her story straight away because in my opinion, she is almost the second main character of this show for me. I think her purpose within the rebellion and her purpose within the show very much mirroring that of Cassian's. So I'm kind of going to talk about her as if she is the other main character. But Mon Mothma, my God, did we need this character's story to be told? What an epic, epic character. What an epic story for her. absolutely sensational performance by Genevieve O'Reilly. I adore this whole story of her. It's just that build up of that weight and experience, and we've been feeling it all throughout the season, all throughout the wedding. I know some people didn't love the wedding scene. I thought it was, again, one of the best scenes in the show was the wedding scene, and her just constantly having to face these incredibly sort of immoral things. She's facing immoral choices of kind of defrauding banks to fund the rebellion, giving her daughter off to this arranged marriage, all these sort of, in a fine way, immoral things that I think Mon would think was immoral, but she's having to do for the greater moral cause of helping the rebellion and taking down the Empire, which is obviously what she believes in. And I think that tension for me of her getting closer and closer to that moment of breaking free and being essentially coming out as anti-Empire, I think was so well done in this show. After the Gorman massacre, where Cassian heads to the Senate and Mon Mothma does this incredible speech. It's I don't even know if I need to talk about it. It's just so perfect, so well written, and brilliantly performed. And as mentioned before, this is also just the scene where Cassian, this just completely unguided, but now becoming his own leader and becoming his own confident and courageous self, and Mon Mothma finally, dropping the veil on, what she thinks of the Empire. Both these characters are finally breaking free to become the leaders of the rebellion, and the importance that they carry within the rebellion is incredible. The tension in this whole sequence, fantastic. Incredibly well shot, incredibly well executed. It's one of those interesting scenes where we know these two characters live, and because we see them later on, obviously, but you still feel that tension, or at least I did anyway. I still felt that intensity of, are they going to get caught? Are they going to get killed? I know that's ridiculous to say, but the absolute palpable nervousness you had in that whole scene was so well done, and that's again down to really fantastic story writing. The next two characters I want to talk about is Luthen and Kleya. These characters are such great vessels to see the various sort of perspectives coming into the rebellion, and how people of all sort of walks have to sacrifice and understand something of their beliefs to become one with the rebellion. And Luthen, I find it so interesting, his story of just always being on that outside. And, near the end of the season, Cassian coming, we need to help Luthen and save Luthen, and the rest of the rebellion, headquarters sort of saying, hey, no, he's too crazy for us. I think is so interesting, because just look at what he does for this rebellion throughout the whole show. Really fantastic, crescendoing this character with him finding out about the Death Star, him speaking to Lonnie. You really feel that crack where he was the one to shoot Lonnie, and then he's like, it's all systems a go now. Episode 10 was such a standout with him and Kleya. Kleya really being this under the radar character throughout this season 1 even as well, and then into season 2 under the radar, but she's very consistent, very there. She's the one really keeping Luthen under control at this point. There's all these notions of suffocation and drowning. Luthen's like, I can't take it anymore, but Kleya's like, hold on, we're almost there, we've almost got it. And this story that unfolds of him essentially kamikazing himself to be able to sacrifice all the information he knows about the rebellion so the Empire doesn't get it was incredibly courageous and harrowing. And even more is Kleya having to go and essentially finish the job for him, so the Empire cannot get their hands on what he knows. Really, really incredible scene. I think this was also set up really well by finally Dedra and him getting to meet and see each other. And I think that was so well presented, because in this episode of episode 10, you don't know exactly if Dedra knows who he is. And the reveal of the Star Path part, that was a really, kind of key icon from the first arc of the first season. That was the first thing that Andor got kind of involved with. That was such a great way to have these characters click, hey, we know one another. And I think for Kleya's character, particularly, really stepping up and stepping out, her being such an equal part of getting into these really dangerous situations, whole heist kind of going into their hospital and trying to, finish Luthen essentially was so intense. And such a deserved arc for her is to get back to Yavin. That was really interesting, of just a story point of Cassian having to convince her that they'll accept her, they'll get her in, and she's going to be taken care of. Not only that being said, but that being shown as well in these last episodes, that she did make it to Yavin, she did make it safe. I think with the amount of loss in this show, that it was really important that we had someone at least get something deserved, and I'm so glad that it was Kleya. Now let's talk about these two incredibly toxic, incredibly crazy and complex characters of Siril and Dedra. Both of these guys are such interesting, intricate characters, both worse for each other, but they kind of suit each other in a weird way. And we've already hit on so many characters and so many incredibly massive moments, but the whole way through we're also having these two just having such a weird vibe. I loved seeing their domestic life. That was really cool. I really love those, stylistically, how they shot that, and shown, how they were living on Coruscant, and then folding Siril into this Gorman story of him working on Gorman and being caught up in this very, very good storytelling. And then the way that, he thinks he's double-crossing the Gormans, but Dedra's really double-crossing him, and then when he finds out is obviously this incredible moment, incredibly confronting moment as well, which is really, it's a lot to digest and absorb at once just before the massacre. And he realizes, and he goes to confront Dedra to say, you know what's going on here, how did you not tell me? It was incredibly confronting scene, but incredibly well acted, and I think really was the part of this point of the story. Both of these characters, Dedra is completely delirious with, I think this is good for the Empire. She's completely delirious with the acts that she's committing. And Siril is delirious with this kind of quest for validation, a place of belonging, whether it's, he has this weird, difficult relationship with his mother. Is he finding that within Dedra? And obviously always longing for that justice and law and order that he's constantly sought for. But he's now delirious with this, by being really confrontingly physical with Dedra, absolutely harrowing to see him then, go into the crowd and go out with the Gormans. And his confrontation with Cassian was absolutely everything I wanted it to be. It was just absolutely manic, intense, and he loses his mind. Absolutely poetic ending for his character as well. Realizing that the Gormans haven't actually done anything wrong, but the Empire is about to destroy like thousands of Gormans. And him having finally this moment of humanity of, is this right? Sort of paired with his own moral quest, again, that word, of finding Cassian, and Cassian being the character that really kicked all this sort of constant downfall for Siril. Cassian was really one that kicked this all off. So this moment, there's so much in it for when they meet each other. And in saying that, there's also so much in it that Cassian does not know him. But, Siril he's gone delirious with how much he needs to catch Cassian. And again, it's back to that validation and kind of need to be purposeful. But in reality, Cassian doesn't even know who he is. Dedra's demise as well in this the finale episodes and the finale arc was also just as poetic and incredible. Krennic being the one to really crack her and go, hey, you're just not cut out for this. You are not it. It was really interesting in the dialogue saying, like, you are so delirious with what you're trying to do here that's almost anti-Empire. It's almost rebellion-like, because you are going so beyond what the Empire is needing from you and wanting you to do. That confrontation with Krennic and Dedra was pretty mind-blowing, pretty perfect to me, really. I think that was an incredible scene and incredibly done by Ben Mendelsohn as Krennic. Her ending up at a Narkina prison as well was such a great reveal. That was such a great thing to do with that character. Deserved, definitely. But again, it's that humanity, and I think we all have this sort of emotional attachment to the Narkina prisons now, obviously, from last season and that arc, that seeing her there, she deserves it, but we feel weird about it because it's like, oh, but we hated how these function and how these exist, and it feels so weird, but it's also fitting for her character. She was trying to climb her way up the ladder and it failed miserably, and now she's just a cog in the wheel, essentially, for the Empire. There's so many other great characters that I could really honestly make separate videos on each of these characters and just analysis of their arc. Obviously, Bix and her sacrifice, of deciding to move away from Cassian so he can focus on the rebellion, Really, really interesting. Love that whole thing. I mean, I love it, but also I sobbed like a baby for it. So it's hard to say I love that. There's so many great characters in and around, but I'll be too long if I just stand here and talk about every single character in the show. Throughout talking about all these characters, I kind of talked about a lot of the visuals about this show and the aesthetics of everything. I think there's pretty much nothing I would fault. This show has definitely cemented for me that the live, realistic, actual location shooting is the way to go for Star Wars for me personally. I think obviously location shooting as well as CG is the perfect sort of recipe for the look and feel of a Star Wars planet or destination. The Gorman Plaza was such a great standout, but sort of every room we would go to, whether it was in Coruscant or Chandrilla, great to see Chandrilla, by the way, in live action. You know, it was seeing all these places, it was real. It was absolutely believable that this is in the Star Wars galaxy. They could have pulled that straight out of the prequels. A lot of those sets and a lot of those destinations looked just like it. So absolutely love the visuals of everything, including all of the costuming as well. Just cannot fault it. It's perfect. Before I get into just everything else I haven't mentioned yet that I love about this show, I'm going to go into things that I might have changed about this season. Even though it's all pretty high praise from me, there are a few things I would have tweaked. The main thing, which I think is the talked about thing, is the pacing of this show. Obviously, condensing down what was going to be a 5-season show into 2 seasons, and this second season having to be these 4 arcs a year apart. I didn't mind it in the end, but when it got to the finale arc, I definitely felt the sort of compression of not having all that space to tell this story. In my personal opinion, I think a season 3 or like 3 seasons of Andor would have been the perfect sweet spot. I think really exploring and expanding the characters we know of Bix and Cassian and Mon all throughout a second season, and like all the Gorman stuff, and then maybe a season 3 exploring all of the after of that, you know, seeing Mon Mothma on Yavin, seeing Cassian and, you know, after Bix leaves him, and, you know, kind of just more time to look at those things and how that plays out. And maybe also another casualty of this kind of spacing and timing thing is that I think I would have loved to seen just a little bit more emphasis on the characters that we had gotten from season 1. So a little bit more with Vel and Cinta, and as well a little bit more with Brasso. I totally get kind of the beat of, you know, Brasso having to die and what that means for the rest of the characters, but I think I just would have liked some more time to see what they were getting up to, you know, Bix and Willman and all those characters. And just as I mentioned before with, you know, having a longer part or, you know, a whole other season to lengthen the finale, I really would have loved to see, this is like my main thing, I wanted much, much more of Mon on Yavin. You know, we have this, she's really a very prominent through line through the whole show of season 1 and season 2. And, you know, when she escapes the Senate, that's such a massive crescendo. I think we should have really kept that going in terms of seeing how she then integrated into Yavin and how she became, you know, how did her voice fit into that sort of headquarters and that council, rebellion council, essentially. I think there's a proper term for them, I forget them. And how that fitted in. And I think within that story, we could also see how Bail Organa got out as well, you know, a year later, or, you know, a period of time later. So those are probably the few fixes I would have tweaked or added to this season. Other things I loved about this season that I just didn't know where else to talk about. One being the involvement of K2. I know a lot of people say they would have loved more K2, but I think he was very seasonally put in there. I think we had to have someone that we really love and comes as this sort of relief character after the weight of not only just the Gorman massacre, Mon's speech, but especially for Cassian Bix leaving, to have then K2 come into the fold, come into the story and be this person of, you know, of closeness and of dependability for Cassian was really important. So I was very pleasantly happy with, you know, how much we got of him, and any scene he was in was perfect. From all his hilarious one-liners to also using that Imperial officer as his meat shield. Incredible. So good. Like, such a great character that he's so funny, but he's still a giant empirical droid that will absolutely kill you. In that same vein, a character that from Rogue One that I think we could have gotten a little bit more of was, of course, Krennic. I think he was just so immaculately played. He's such a cool character, so well done. Ben Mendelsohn is so compelling and a fellow Australian, so I felt particularly connected there. But he was just awesome. And again, like I mentioned before, like his sort of involvement with Dedra, him sort of meeting Mon and like that kind of interplay of that relationship, so good. The one major thing that we did not get from Andor Season 2, and we'll never get now, we'll never get the answer, and I am still waiting for. I think I'm going to handwrite a letter for Lucasfilm. Who is Uncle Harlow? Who is he? He's somehow so powerful, gets everyone jobs, can get into like ISB, Bureau standards, can get anywhere and anything, but he's nowhere to be seen, but he's so high up. But then Dedra's like, he's not that great, he's a criminal. Who is this guy? That sounds like the most interesting backstory of a character ever. We need to know who the hell Uncle Harlow is. I was kind of hoping that Uncle Harlow was going to be like Luthen or some weird shit, but I just was holding on ever since season 1 of this mention of this Uncle Harlow come help you. Like ever since his mention, I'm like, we needed to meet this guy. So very disappointed that we did not. So here's really kind of where wraps up all my thoughts for season 2. As you can hear and see, I'm incredibly impressed. The character development and arcs and each of these main characters, Siril, Dedra, Luthen, Kleya, Mon, Cassian, everyone just has these big robust stories and journeys that they go on, and I think everyone can relate to at least one or probably more of these stories of going through these hard experiences and how do you pursue life after, experiencing harrowing events like Bix, Bix, her story and the hardship she experienced and how does she pursue life after that. That goes for everyone. It was such a human story that they shared, which I think is just what made it so emotionally deep and so gritty to chew on of a show. But even making it this super deep show, they made it a very Star Wars show this season for me. I think I just love the sets. I love the planets we went to, the Coruscant, the Chandrilla, even Gorman. You cannot deny that this looks like it is in Star Wars. I am absolutely going to completely forget like a certain character scene or something from this overall review, but I, for now, have gotten all my thoughts out. So jump down in the comments and give me, don't make it too long. Make it a kind of short summary so I can read it, of what you thought of Andor Season 2 overall, all together. I appreciate you watching the video and being here. Make sure you subscribe and hit that bell to know when I'm going live and posting other videos, and I'll catch you in the next one. Make sure you always choose the RaeSide.